Hello, everyone. This is Vera Kichanova from Free Cities Foundation. Our mission is to support innovation in governance around the world to bring more freedom and prosperity. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest, Patri Friedman, founder of Pronomos Capital. Patri is a pioneer of the Free Cities movement. He has been in this business for over 20 years. He wrote several books and many more articles on the topic. He was the co-founder of Seasteading Institute and infected many people with the idea of creating autonomous, self-governed floating communities in the open sea. He has backed some of the most prominent experiments in private governance, including the famous charter cities in Honduras. And last but not least, Patri comes from a well-known dynasty of liberty promoters. He is the son of libertarian scholar David Friedman and the grandson of economist Milton Friedman. Patri, it's great to have you here, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, great to be here, and I'm so excited for the conference.
So yes, speaking of which, before we start, let me remind you that in just a few days, many of us, including Patri and myself, will meet in Prague for a 3-day gathering called Liberty in Our Lifetime. We have a great list of speakers from Brazil to Senegal to Serbia, covering such diverse topics as seasteading, crypto secession, urban growth in the developing world, the future of education, and many more. Check the full program at lifetimeliberty.com. So, Patri, I wanted to first start with the Pronomos Capital. So it is the first ever investment fund for sovereign communities for such diverse kinds like free cities, seasteads, charter cities, and other examples of innovative governance. What are the highlights of your current portfolio, at least those that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm most excited about Honduras Prospera because that's the company that's gotten the furthest. They're several years ahead of everyone else. They actually have an operating zone in Honduras that's growing rapidly. Also really excited for Praxis, which has a society of 12,000 people who are committed to moving together to a city and is working on their funding for their first build and their government deal. I think they're most likely to be next to build. And Talent Cities Lagos, which is building a community called Atana in Nigeria, and also offering a digital residency for Nigeria's first digital special economic zone. So they've created legislation with the government to have a virtual special economic zone where if you incorporate within the zone, you get the benefits of the legal differences wherever you are. Mm-hmm. And then also really excited for Small Farm Cities, one of our companies, which is building greenhouses and aquaculture, small farms, and then villages around the farms in Malawi. It's growing really fast.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the Praxis community. So it is not yet attached to a particular territory, right? How does it work?
That's right. Yeah, part of the idea for Praxis was that they would gather the demand first. So they're following a bit of Balaji Srinivasan's network state idea of going with a cloud community first, a set of people who all share a vision for what kind of city they want to live in, and then share ideals, and they get together at in-person events. And then with that demand, that makes it easier to raise money because you can show that there's people who are going to live in the real estate that you're trying to fund. And it makes it easier to negotiate with a country because you're showing like, these are the people that we're going to bring. So they're doing it that way. So it's a pretty interesting approach that I'm excited about. And of course, my philosophy is called competitive governance. It's getting governments to compete for people. Mm-hmm. And so it's great to be able to have multiple governments kind of competing to offer you this concession.
Mm-hmm. It is speaking of compete. So one of your articles where you talk about competitive governance, you also talk about the importance of foot voting, that free movement between jurisdictions accelerate this competition of governance for us, for citizens. And in the last few years, many of us have switched to remote work and remote socializing and become more flexible and more mobile. Do you think it has helped the cause? Do you think it has made governments think that they should do something extra to make people stay where they are or move?
Definitely. I mean, look at the way that Portugal is advertising for citizens, or the rise of the digital nomad visa, which is a brand new and rapidly growing thing. Now, look, it's going to take time for like the feedback from this increased competition to kind of result in competitive pressure that makes jurisdictions like work better. That's a slower process, but I definitely think we're seeing it happen already.
Mm-hmm. So another concept that you are writing in that same article and that you also just briefly mentioned is the unbundling of governance and territory, when you can be part of some jurisdiction without physically being in that place. So as far as I understand, this is what Praxis is planning to do. And one of the other, what was the last?
Well, so Praxis, it's that they're gathering their community before moving, but they're still going to have a physical jurisdiction. But Talent Cities is offering this digital special economic zone, much like the way that Dubai International Financial Center made it so that you can incorporate within DIFC, and then your corporation operates under the laws of DIFC wherever it is in the UAE, even if it's not physically located there.
So that would be the digital talent city is entirely digital jurisdiction.
Yeah, and we saw some of this during the pandemic, where there were special economic zones where people suddenly couldn't go in to work because of the pandemic, and they worked at home remotely. And so I think it was Colombia actually, and some other countries actually made it so that you counted as being in the special economic zone and under its rules, even when you were remote working from home. And they just kind of needed to do that for the pandemic, but it's also a great idea. Remote workers should have a jurisdiction they're associated with, kind of like a ship has a flag that it's registered with, and then, be under that jurisdiction.
Yes, this is exciting. And I know that Prospera is also introducing this element of non-territoriality in a way that you can be an electronic resident, e-resident, so you can register a firm in Honduras without ever physically visiting the Roatan Island. And I know that they have hired specialists from Estonia who had previously introduced a similar e-governance there. Do you know of any other good examples of how this unbundling works in real life?
Yeah, there's another product I'm working with, a company called Metropolis that I'm a board member of. So in Palau, we're creating an offshore corporate registry where you can incorporate under the laws of Delaware. And then we're going to add other jurisdictions. So Palau is not copying the corporate law of these other jurisdictions. It's just incorporating it by reference. So you can register your corporation in Palau, and then any like disputes get arbitrated under the laws of Delaware. Then they're going to add Singapore and Taiwan and Caymans and other jurisdictions. So you can, because the nature of law, one of the metaphors that I talk about is the idea of law as code, that there's actually like a really deep parallel between law, which is like systems of instructions and decision-making procedures, and code, right? They're both sort of like made of information. They can be applied in the same way that code can be instantiated on different servers. Law can be applied to different territories. It's not like wiring up a physical power line. You can just say, this law applies here. Oh, now this law applies here. Now it applies here. It's just a momentary action. And so this idea that all law is open source, because any law that's not a secret, right? There are some laws that are like secret proceedings where like the citizens don't get to know what the law is, but that's very rare, because the nature of law is that we have to know what it is to follow it. And we humans really hate it when there are laws that are like secret from us. And so kind of all laws are published openly, and that means that law is open source. And so you can go out and copy the laws of other jurisdictions and copy them and remix them. This is one thing I'm hoping to inspire people to do, is a lot more of this applying the techniques of open source software to law. And so that's part of why I'm excited about this project in Palau. It's making use of this fact to say, hey, why not use Delaware corporate law or Singapore corporate law or Cayman's corporate law in another country? Like, there's nothing stopping us. There's plenty of arbitrators that know how to arbitrate it. And it's, literally just this a declaration of what kind of law you're going to use. So I'm really psyched to be working on that one.
So if you compare what the experiments that and projects you just mentioned to, say, the conventional, if I may say, offshore zones and special jurisdictions, what's the added benefit? What's the added innovative element compared to, say, the Dubai center?
Yeah, well, so with this Palau law, like you can already open an offshore entity anywhere, but it's using that jurisdiction's corporate law. And so you have to switch to or get to know a new body of corporate law. So what's exciting about Palau is you could decide, oh, I have a Delaware corporation, but I want it to not be in the US. And move it over and keep all of your corporate documents and resolutions and everything totally the same. All of, your corporate charter, everything just gets moved over exactly as it is, because you're under the same body of law. So I think that's pretty new and exciting.
So if we go back to the Honduran experiment, so we've all been following it with some anxiety when there was the change in the government, and now what we're seeing is the new leftist government is trying to shut down the Zeta experiment. Isn't that worrying? What can be done about that? How do you see the perspective of Prospera and other charter cities?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't comment there specifically. I don't have any knowledge besides what's public, but in general, it's the most common question that investors would ask me when I was raising for Pronomos is, what happens if there's a change in government and the new government tries to, take end the zone's special status, and or take it over and seize the property. What do you do about it? And there's a variety of different mechanisms that can be used for this. One of them is international treaties like the New York Convention, or the various free trade agreements. So Honduras is part of the DR CAFTA, the Dominican Republic and Central American Free Trade Agreement. And, of course, Prospera, just like any of these projects, knew that this would be a risk when they started, and we investors in it knew that it was a risk. And they did their best to set themselves up legally so that their status would be preserved. And, we're going to find out now in this dispute between the Honduran government and Prospera. We're going to find out what happens and whether or not that works. And learn from it. But it's definitely, it's really unfortunate that it happened, but kind of something that all of these projects worry about. And there's a whole set of different mechanisms that can be used to protect them. It's making sure that there are like ways to enforce the agreement on the sovereign, or ways that like the sovereign can be like fined or punished if they don't stick to their agreements.
So in any place where you're trying to create such a startup city, you need a green light, at least in the current legal system, from some government to get a special jurisdiction status. Why would the government do it? Why would they help kind of their competitors? What are the arguments you use to, or your partners, developers use to convince them?
I don't really think of them as competitors so much as these jurisdictions are helping bring the country to greater prosperity. And the main incentive is, I think, is economic growth. And, and country, look, I come from a software engineering background, and this, law as code, there's a lot of different ways that informs me. So I worked at Google for 10 years, and at Google, when you needed to replace some really important system, right, you don't just start editing and tinkering with the live system that's out there serving millions of users, right? You start with, a blank, totally new code, totally new tech stack, and you start, just on a development server, and you build it up, and you think it works. Maybe you test it with some other people, and when that works well enough, maybe you test it on with 1% of the live traffic, or 0.1%, like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100, and then you see what happens. And countries need this too. They need ways of trying out really new things, getting comfortable with them, and seeing how that works with a smaller number of people. I also think there's kind of like, I mean, we almost call them like network effects of corruption, where it's really, really hard to change kind of the culture or the corruption or the legal structure of an entire system at once, right? It's very difficult. And I think it's like a really promising approach, is to say, okay, we're not going to try to change the existing system because that's very messy. We're going to create a new system on a blank canvas and then scale that up if we like what we see. And it's just, it's just like, it's what we do in code. I think it's what we got to do. It's what we do in clinical trials, right? When you're trying a new medication, you try it in the lab, you try it in test tubes, you try it on mice, you try it on monkeys, you try it on a few volunteers, right? And you scale it up before you try it on everyone. And I just think that we ought to be doing the same thing with our laws.
Patri, I was listening to this extended metaphor of law as a code, and I was thinking, do you think this is the fact that you, like people from the software camp, can see governance in that way explains why these two communities are so overlapping?
I mean, I think of it just as like people who think in terms of systems and abstractions and are open to new things, right? And that's like the nature of software and technology, is that it involves thinking a lot in terms of systems and abstractions and working with networks, and trying out new things. And I think that, like, the old approaches to reforming government were things like, let's start a new political party, or let's influence my political party, let's get someone elected, what I call folk activism. And I think that those old ways, they don't work very much, because most of the issues are at the systems level. They're not based on which parties you have or which candidates you have. And so I think those old ways don't work that well. And the new promising routes to improve governance are coming from this mindset of thinking about systems and doing things in really new ways.
The question that I was really looking forward to asking you and hearing your thoughts. So speaking of virtual jurisdictions, how do you see the perspectives of the metaverse on this, in this sense? So like a place where you can test drive these ideas, rules for mutual existence, for doing business sort of in a lab, as you just explained, and then if it works, implement in the real world jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, look, the nature of the digital world is that we have really low barriers to entry to creating new systems of law and governance, and really low costs of switching. And so just by its nature, cyberspace has tons of experiments and a much faster rate of evolution. And that's awesome, right? That gives us a test bed that we can use to find the next generation of legal and political systems, and then try them out in person in the real world.
Do you know of any currently running experiments of that kind?
Well, I mean, to me, the entire cryptocurrency sector, like every cryptocurrency network has a governance structure and like is a governance experiment.
No, I'm
DAOs,
speaking of the metaverse environment. So,
in the
well, I
metaverse.
know of course, I know the Liberland project, because I had some. I played a role as a designer in the designer contest as a juror. So that's one example, but maybe you know of something else.
No, I mean, I know a few things that are being developed, but nothing that's released yet.
And this Praxis project, are they considering metaverse as a place to gather and
No, they have a Discord, so they're all about community. They have a Discord, but they're gonna, their aim is to materialize in the real city. But I know another city project that's working on creating a digital twin, so that they can actually like sell parcels in the metaverse that will then be owned in the real world and have people like meet their neighbors, right? And meet the
Mm-hmm.
people in their city and kind of create a place to hang out in the metaverse with the community of people who are going to live together. I think
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense in this like network state vision of having values aligned sets of people who get to know each other and
Mm-hmm.
coordinate online and then move to a city together. I mean, I'd love to have the place that I hang out in the metaverse, right? Be
Mm-hmm.
like, I'd love to hang out with the people who are thinking about moving to Prospera, the people who are thinking about moving to Praxis, the people who are thinking about moving to Talent Cities.
Mm-hmm.
Like, have those be the places that we hang out to forge those connections, that can lead to a good city.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that yeah, metaverse is kind of has the best of the both worlds, the spontaneity of face-to-face contacts, even if it's in the virtual world, and the ability to talk to collaborate to a person who is anywhere in the world, no matter of disregarding the national borders. So it
Yeah.
brings the spontaneity element into virtual communities. That's the way I see it. And how do you, as Pronomos, choose projects that you would like to support? How do you know that, say, this particular one is going to run, has a future?
Yeah, so we look for full-time committed founders who've done some amount of work and have some traction already. And then we kind of evaluate them as entrepreneurs based on their background and experience and what they've built so far. And we look at their vision. We have to trust the jurisdiction or jurisdictions that they're working with and kind of believe in their business model and their approach. Believe that they'll be able to bring a community together strongly enough that they'll want to move to a place in person. Believe that they'll be able to negotiate with governments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know which government is going to stick to the agreement?
Well, you have to just like look at the country's track record and
Mm-hmm.
their past actions, right, at the beginning. And then as you get further along, you actually talk to the country. So we at Pronomos are going to visit Africa for the first time later this year. We've got these companies, talent cities in Nigeria and small farm cities in Malawi. We're going to go and visit the countries and talk to the governments. And we're also probably be visiting a couple other countries where we're thinking about creating projects, talking to government leaders and business leaders. And, honestly, just like people on the street or in the coffee shop or whatever, just to get to know like what they think about a project like this. One thing about Prospera, I think the group of people that created the program in Honduras were, really, really, really like great people. They did an amazing thing, but overall there's always like a strong minority of people who like really resisted it and didn't like the program. And it's really unfortunate for a vocal minority to be able to prevent something that benefits the prosperity of a whole country. But that's the reality of it. I'd much rather, if I'm going to go invest somewhere, I'd much rather work someplace where there aren't people who are ideologically opposed to what we're doing, right? Where the people in the country just think, wow, this is an exciting thing that we're hosting in our country that we're part of. Like, I'll be really proud if it takes off. If there's like even like one person in 10 who's like, oh, this is a horrible, evil thing. If it happens in my country, then, you're welcome to think that, and that's fine. And I'd just rather not work those places.
But if it takes just a small group to disrupt a big project with a large number of potential beneficiaries,
Yeah.
then you could think that in any country you would find these people who are just
I don't think that's
posing
the
for
case.
ideological reasons, not because they are afraid that a
No.
particular project will hurt them, but just because
I think
capitalism.
in places like Africa and Asia, they don't have the same generic like left, right,
Mhm.
like we view like foreigners as like here to exploit us kind of thing. I think that there are a lot of places where they look at, well, what is the actual partnership with the foreigners and what are the benefits that we're getting? And are we like both sharing in any value that's being created? And and they look at it much more reasonably. And look, if the whole world had vocally opposed minorities, then we'd have to rethink this. But right now, I think that there's a lot of countries that are just kind of neutral and are going to judge the project on how it actually works and what benefits it actually brings to the country, and not through some ideological lens that like views it as a symbol of something. And if we can just work in those countries, I'd much rather do that.
Yes, I've noticed actually on your Pronomos website that 3 out of 5 projects that you list are in Africa. And that made me think that, made me wanted to ask you, do you think if this is where the future of free cities lie, in Africa?
It's definitely a huge place. I mean, if you just look at the fact that they're like urbanizing rapidly, and that like that's where population growth is still happening. And so the percentage of young people, right? And it's young people that are open to new ideas and hungry for new ways of living, most of all. And so they're moving to cities anyway. So why not build new cities have to be built for them. Why not build some of them in this innovative model? And young people are more open to innovation. And that's just where the people like fresh out of college or whatever, like there's not going to be that many of them in the rest of the world because the rest of the world is not having kids. So I think Africa is very important. It's not the only continent that matters, but it's going to be huge for sure.
Yes, we will have at the conference in Prague, we will have people from all parts of the world, from Guatemala to Malta to Senegal to South Africa to Serbia. So are there any other regions that you think are specifically promising in terms of competitive governance?
Well, I'm working with a number of Pacific countries. They have the advantage that they're pretty small and innovative, and they do have a history with things like monetizing their sovereignty. If you look at like the .tv domain name that Tuvalu did, for example, or some of the economic citizenships. So I think that's promising. I think that Latin America and the Caribbean, I mean, pretty much everywhere that's not like North America or Europe. In Asia, the challenge is that we're doing these new pretty small things, and in Asia they build, if you look at like in China, like they build huge cities just like as a matter of course, like already. So there's not as much room to kind of get in as like small new city builders.
Yes. But on the other hand, everything's done much more quickly there than in the Western Europe and America. So I worked with architects. They used to say that it takes less time to build a city from scratch in China than to get a permission for a roof extension in somewhere in London. So there is a trade-off of that sort. And the last question, probably before we wrap it up, seasteading. Are you currently involved in any seasteading projects?
Yes, I'm on the board of seasteading, and I'm following with great interest the work that Ocean Builders is doing in Panama, where they're building the first sea pods. And at the Seasteading Institute, we've commissioned one of these sea pods that we're going to be setting up and renting out as a sea B&B. So people can go and rent it by the night and enjoy the seasteading lifestyle. And, we'll fill it with these various seasteading board games and fiction books that have been written, and the nonfiction books that most inspired us, so people can really, just be there and kind of marinate in seasteading. So I'm very excited about that. I remain interested in cruise ship projects. I kind of have my doors open to anybody who's working on like a cruise ship seasteading company, whether it's medical tourism or retirement communities or something else. I think there's some potential there. And I'm getting more involved with Ephemerisle, which is the floating festival in Northern California in the Sacramento Delta currently. Next year will be the 15th year. And I'm going to look into doing an Ephemerisle in the Caribbean and or the Mediterranean in the next couple of years. We got some things in the works there to kind of extend to Ephemerisle offshore. So those are the main things.
It sounds very exciting. And I also know that your partner and co-author, Joe Quirk, will make some big announcement at the conference in Prague about something seasteading related. I don't know the details, although I'm with the
Mhm.
organizers. So it's a big secret, which we're all looking forward to know. Thank you very much, Patri. This has been a very enlightening conversation, and I am looking, and I'm sure our viewers and my colleagues are all looking forward to hearing more of you in Prague
Wonderful.
in just 4 days, right? It's 4 days left.
Yep, I'm on a plane in 2 days.
Yeah, amazing. So for our viewers, please check lifetimeliberty.com for the full program tickets. If you're a student, you're eligible for a discounted ticket, and you have just listened Patri and myself talking about virtual jurisdictions. You can easily attend it all in the virtual mode. You can attend the conference online if you can't travel to Prague. So online or offline, hopefully see you in a few days. And thank you, Patri, for your time.
You're welcome. Yeah, and you can follow our work at Pronomos VC on Twitter, or go to our website, pronomos.vc, to find our various social media channels.
Thank you.